At 10 p.m. on August 23, 1944, Sergeant Bob Tompkins crouched behind a hedgerow outside Brest, inflating a rubber Sherman tank just 2 kilometers from German anti-tank guns. 27 years old, 4 deception missions behind him, and not a single real tank destroyed, because that was the point. The Germans had 38,000 troops defending Fortress Brest, and Tompkins' job was to make them believe 30,000 Americans were about to smash their right flank using nothing but inflatable tanks, sound trucks, fake radio chatter, and painted illusions as the 603rd Camouflage Engineers, exhausted, soaked from rain, running on zero sleep and cold rations, followed 8th Corps orders to simulate 2 full tank battalions with just 1,100 men and rubber, inflating a 93-pound fake M4 Sherman that looked deadly from 800 yards through German binoculars, but would collapse if you leaned on it, while enemy observers watched from a church tower and likely called in artillery coordinates, unaware this army had no armor, no artillery, just carbines, machine guns, artists, engineers, actors, fashion designers like Bill Blass, painters like Ellsworth Kelly, photographers, West Point grads mixed with art school dropouts, all part of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, the Ghost Army, activated in January 1944 to fight with illusion instead of firepower, using dummy tanks visible from the air, sound trucks blasting recorded engines and shouting sergeants, radio operators mimicking real divisions, and jeeps painted with fake insignia, having already pulled off missions like fake Mulberry Harbors and Operation Fortitude to mislead Hitler about Normandy. But now the stakes were extreme. Real U.S. divisions had to withdraw so Patton could race across France, and the Ghost Army had to hold the line with fakes. If discovered, 1,100 lightly armed men wouldn't last minutes, so as Tompkins checked his watch at 02:30 with only hours until dawn, Task Force X rushed to inflate 15 tanks before Luftwaffe reconnaissance planes arrived at 0600, knowing that if the tanks looked fake from the air, the operation would fail, and if they looked real, German 88mm guns would start firing, as men like Private James Anderson, an auto mechanic from Virginia, carved fake tank tracks with a bulldozer to sell the illusion. Compressors jammed and restarted, rubber hulls expanded into shape, sound trucks rolled in at 0330, playing just loud enough to fool listening posts. Dawn broke at 0612. A German recon plane passed at 0647, snapping photos, and by noon, intercepted radio traffic confirmed the truth. The Germans were redeploying up to 50 anti-tank guns directly at Tompkins' fake Shermans, proof the deception worked, and proof that an idea born just 6 months earlier in a London office, inspired by British tricks in North Africa, and built from scratch with no doctrine, no manuals, only creativity and nerve, had just convinced the enemy to aim real firepower at an army that didn't exist. And if you want to know how far this illusion went and how many lives it saved, you already know what to do.
The sound equipment was experimental. Mobile trucks fitted with massive speakers capable of projecting audio over long distances, blasting vinyl recordings of tank columns, artillery fire, and troop movements at night when German listening posts were active. While the third pillar of deception came from radio operators who could mimic entire divisions, copying real communication patterns down to call signs, procedures, and even operator quirks, convincing German intelligence they were tracking real combat units. And by April, the Ghost Army was officially ready. 1,100 men split into 4 specialized units: the 603rd Camouflage Engineers for visual deception, the Signal Company for radio deception, the 406th Combat Engineers for security, and the Sonic Company for audio.
But no one knew if it would actually work, because British deception had succeeded in the deserts of North Africa, not in Normandy's hedgerows, villages, and fortified defenses built over 4 years. So an advance party flew to England on April 10th to figure out how deception could fit into D-Day with less than 2 months to prepare, while the main force crossed the Atlantic and arrived in Bristol on May 15th, just as Operation Fortitude was already convincing Hitler the invasion would hit Pas-de-Calais instead of Normandy, and the Ghost Army was meant to support that illusion. Yet Colonel Rear faced a terrifying reality. If their deception looked fake, the mission failed, and if it looked too real, the Germans would attack, and 1,100 lightly armed men wouldn't survive. So when D-Day hit on June 6th and real soldiers stormed Omaha and Utah, the Ghost Army sat in England inflating practice tanks, frustrated and powerless, until June 21st, when a small detachment crossed the channel to simulate a fake Mulberry Harbor with lights to draw German artillery away from the real ones. A mission that barely registered but revealed something critical. The Germans were watching, calculating, waiting. Because when the full unit arrived in France on June 23rd and bivouacked near the beaches, surrounded by burned-out tanks and the smell of cordite, this was no longer training. And their first real test came in July during Operation Brittany, as Patton's Third Army raced east while the Ghost Army split into 4 task forces. Each impersonated a different division, using fake markings, fake radio traffic, sound trucks, and soldiers spreading misinformation in cafes, leading German intelligence to report 4 American divisions moving into Brittany, while the real forces slipped past toward Paris. And by the time the Germans realized the columns were fake, it was too late. But success created a dangerous myth that the Ghost Army could do anything, flooding them with impossible requests, because deception wasn't magic. It required precision, timing, and perfection, where one wrong sound level or radio pattern meant exposure and death. A lesson Lieutenant Colonel Frederick Day understood after seeing how quickly German artillery could annihilate a discovered position, leading soldiers like Private James Anderson to write the truth in his diary. "We're bait," because the Ghost Army's job was to look valuable enough to draw enemy fire, and to do that, they had to operate within artillery range, sniper distance, and constant observation, minimizing risk where they could, but never escaping it. And by late August, as Sergeant Tompkins inflated rubber tanks outside Brest, the unit had already completed 5 deception operations, each one bringing them closer to the enemy, and closer to being discovered. 0 men killed, 18 wounded, all from random artillery fire, not targeted strikes, just bad luck from operating too close to the front. But the men knew their luck wouldn't last forever, because eventually German intelligence would notice the pattern, connect the dots, and realize some American units only appeared at night, only talked on the radio, and never actually attacked. And when that happened, the Ghost Army would stop being bait and become the target. And rubber tanks don't stop bullets, so at Brest, Tompkins watched morning light spread across his inflatable Shermans, knowing somewhere German artillery crews were loading shells to destroy what they thought was a real armored battalion, unaware that at 0400, Task Force X had already deflated the tanks, packed them onto trucks, and vanished before the real assault began. And when the attack hit on August 25, 1944, with 75,000 Americans crashing into Fortress Brest from 3 directions, German intelligence reported tank battalions threatening both flanks, forcing General Romke to reposition between 20 and 50 88mm guns toward empty fields, weakening the German defense just enough to reduce American tank losses, not win the battle, but tilt the odds. And after 27 brutal days, Brest fell. The the garrison destroyed or captured, and the Ghost Army barely had time to rest before being thrown into Operation Bettenberg, where 1,100 men had to impersonate 15,000 and hold a critical gap in Patton's thin lines using nothing but sound trucks and radio deception, broadcasting fake tank movements and non-stop division-level radio traffic for 7 straight days, while German artillery fired harassment rounds into the sector, wounding 3 men by sheer chance, yet never discovering the deception, allowing real American units to move in and the Ghost Army to slip away again. And by late September, the after-action reports told a staggering story. Multiple successful operations, minimal casualties, 6 weeks inside artillery range, but the psychological toll was crushing because their job wasn't to fight or advance, it was to be seen, to draw fire, to look dangerous without shooting back. And as missions pushed closer to the front with higher stakes, the men knew the worst was still coming, because in December 1944, Hitler launched his last gamble in the West, the Battle of the Bulge, unleashing 250,000 troops across the Ardennes, shattering American lines, spreading confusion, wiping out reserves. And as German tanks rolled forward and communications collapsed, General Bradley needed time, needed reinforcements, needed the Germans to believe American strength existed where it didn't. And once again, the Ghost Army was about to step directly into the fire.
Except for the Ghost Army, 1,100 men with inflatable tanks. Because with no real reserves left, Bradley's staff approved Operation Kodak, a radio-only deception with no visuals and no sound effects, just fake communications designed to convince German intelligence that 2 full American divisions were moving south of the breakthrough, forcing Hitler's commanders to divert forces against reinforcements that didn't exist, even though the mission was insanely dangerous as the front was collapsing and nobody knew exactly where German units were, meaning the Ghost Army could literally drive into the enemy while setting up. So on December 19th, radio operators went on the air impersonating the 75th Infantry Division and the 6th Armored Division, transmitting supply requests, movement orders, reconnaissance reports, tank maintenance logs, fuel requisitions, artillery coordination messages, hundreds of perfectly authentic transmissions every day, matching real operator quirks, timing, abbreviations, and procedures so precisely that German direction-finding units triangulated the signals, mapped the phantom divisions, and fully believed them, with German after-action reports later confirming they tracked 2 American divisions moving toward Bastogne exactly as simulated. Even though the risk was enormous, because if German commanders believed the threat, they might strike preemptively, while Ghost Army operators froze in trucks parked in open fields, vacuum tubes shattering in sub-zero temperatures, fingers numb as they transmitted non-stop, knowing every message made them more visible. All while the real battle raged just miles north, where the 101st Airborne was surrounded at Bastogne, with no ammo, no resupply, ordered only to hold, as Patton raced north with 3 divisions and desperately needed time. And Operation Kodak bought it, confusing German intelligence for 4 crucial days as they repositioned forces to counter units that didn't exist. And by the time they realized the deception, Patton had already broken through on December 26th, lifting the siege and ending Hitler's gamble. Even though the Ghost Army's role went unseen with no headlines or medals because radio deception doesn't make good photos, but Bradley knew, Simpson knew, Patton knew that 1,100 men with transmitters had helped save Bastogne, and after Kodak, the unit returned to ever more dangerous missions, Flaxweiler in January, Land Villers in February, each more refined, more professional, and more risky as German intelligence began noticing patterns, questioning why some American units only appeared at night, generated radio traffic but never attacked, were vanished without wreckage. And the Ghost Army understood that once the enemy connected the dots, they would become the highest priority target in Europe.
which made March 1945 their most dangerous moment yet during Operation Viersen, when Colonel Rear received orders to deceive the Germans about the Rhine crossing by making them believe the Ninth Army would cross at Wesel instead of the real site 15 miles south at Rheinberg, requiring the largest deception of the war, with 4 days to deploy over 600 inflatable tanks, trucks, artillery pieces, fake supply dumps, sonic trucks playing non-stop construction and troop noise, and massive radio networks simulating entire corps headquarters. And when the operation went live on March 21st, German artillery responded instantly with the heaviest bombardment the Ghost Army had ever faced, wounding men, destroying equipment, forcing operators to relocate while continuing transmissions under fire, as Luftwaffe reconnaissance planes photographed the fake buildup every few hours. And when the real crossing began on March 23rd at Rheinberg, German resistance was lighter than expected because forces had been pulled north to counter the illusion, allowing the Ninth Army to establish a bridgehead and push 20,000 men across within 48 hours, prompting General William Simpson to formally commend the Ghost Army for saving thousands of lives, though the success came at a cost they were about to feel.
12 men wounded and more equipment destroyed than in any previous mission, as German artillery hammered their positions for 3 straight days. The Ghost Army exhausted after non-stop operations since March 18th, with no sleep, constant bombardment, and the pressure of maintaining the illusion under fire, knowing Operation Viersen would be their final major deception, even though no one yet knew the war was almost over. So they prepared for more missions, more fake armies, more nights inflating rubber tanks while shells fell, having carried out 21 deception operations across France, Luxembourg, Belgium, and Germany, repeatedly fooling Hitler's intelligence services and saving an estimated 15,000 to 30,000 American lives without anyone knowing they existed, until May 8, 1945, when Germany surrendered and the war in Europe ended, leaving the Ghost Army alive but invisible, their final record reading 21 operations, 3 men killed, 48 wounded, 0 catastrophic failures, every mission successful in some measure and none fully exposed, after which Colonel Reiner assembled all 1,100 men in a field near Luxembourg and told them the truth. Their records would be classified, documents sealed, equipment destroyed or locked away, and they would be sworn to absolute secrecy, forbidden to discuss their missions with family, friends, or even fellow veterans, because inflatable deception, sonic warfare, and radio manipulation were too valuable to reveal, violations punishable by court-martial, meaning they couldn't even admit serving in the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops and would instead claim ordinary combat assignments. And when the unit officially disbanded on June 23rd, exactly 1 year after arriving in France, the men sailed home on the USS General O. Ernst, returned to civilian life, artists back to art, engineers to engineering, Bill Blass to New York fashion, Ellsworth Kelly to Paris painting, photographers to magazines, all carrying a secret they couldn't explain, listening to other veterans' war stories while unable to tell their own, as Bob Tompkins quietly told his family he'd served with an engineering unit and hid his illegal diary away in a box, until the silence finally broke 50 years later when the Pentagon declassified the Ghost Army in 1996, allowing filmmakers and historians to uncover the truth, culminating in a 2013 PBS documentary, and finally, in 2024, 79 years after the war, Congress awarding the Ghost Army the Congressional Gold Medal, attended by just 3 surviving veterans in their mid-90s, long after most of the 1,100 had died without recognition, even though their methods still shape modern warfare through inflatable decoys, electronic warfare, and deception operations, proving that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't firepower, but creativity, leaving behind a final unanswered question:
How many lives did they really save? Whether 15,000, 30,000, or somewhere in between, because confusion leaves no body count, only possibilities, like tankers who survived because rubber Shermans drew fire, airborne troops saved because phantom divisions delayed the enemy, soldiers who crossed the Rhine because German guns were aimed 15 miles away at an army that didn't exist. And when Tompkins' daughter found his hidden diary years later, and James Anderson spoke once before his death, both agreed the strangest part wasn't the danger, but the silence. A silence finally broken by a single inflatable Sherman tank on display in New Orleans, 93 pounds of rubber that helped win a war. And if this story moved you, hit like, subscribe, and share it, because remembering the Ghost Army is how we make sure these men are never silent again.